Her daughter-in-law flung the rent letter at her and laughed. "You own this place? Please, you can't even afford a new robe." Paula Worthing, her mother-in-law and longtime tenant, said nothing. "We're just getting started, but before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? These stories aren't just mine, they're mirrors." Drop your city in the comments, and if you believe in second chances, hit subscribe. She said I'd never own a thing, then handed me a rent hike notice. The envelope was pink, not soft, pastel pink, but businesslike and sharp, the kind designed to draw attention even before you slid it open. Paula sat at her kitchen table in her robe, morning sun slanting across the linoleum, the scent of toast and bitter orange marmalade in the air. She knew what the letter was before reading the first line. Effective November 1st, your monthly rent will increase by $37 to $5. Her hand stilled. The butter knife clinked gently against the ceramic plate. Upstairs, a chair scraped loudly, probably Megan pulling out her breakfast stool with that high-heeled stomp. Paula could identify in her sleep. She read the letter twice more. The landlord's name was new, unfamiliar, probably a shell company. Paula had seen those names before on property notices taped around the neighborhood, but it wasn't the rent increase that hit hardest. It was the sentence just above the signature line. "We are committed to modernizing the space and bringing it up to contemporary family standards." Contemporary family. She folded the letter, placed it under the sugar bowl, and stared out the window for a long time. That evening, Paula climbed the exterior stairs to the main floor, her knees stiff, each step echoing a quiet fatigue she'd long since learned not to name. Aaron had invited her to dinner. Megan hadn't objected, which was as good as a welcome. The dining room smelled of lemon garlic chicken and store-bought biscuits reheated in the oven. Megan wore a crisp white top and red lipstick. Her tone was casual as she poured wine, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "So," Megan said, slipping a hand across Aaron's arm as they sat. "We got the letter too. Looks like the whole building's going upscale." Finally, she chuckled softly, then sipped her wine. "Guess you'll never own this place after all, huh?" Aaron shifted, his knife paused mid-cut. "Megan, I'm just saying," she shrugged. "Some people stay in starter spots too long. Everything's changing." Paula didn't answer. She couldn't, not without the words catching on something sharp in her chest. She simply folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate. When Aaron touched her wrist gently and mouthed, "I'm sorry," she gave him a smile so small it could have been mistaken for a flinch. Back in her own unit downstairs, Paula changed into her nightgown and stood for a long time in front of the mirror. Her reflection didn't blink. It wasn't about the money. It hadn't been for years. It was about how the world and people she'd helped raise assumed she would always be beneath it. She sat at her modest desk, opened her laptop, and typed a message. "Ruth, what if I wanted to buy property? Something long-term. Just asking." She hovered for a moment, then hit send. In the quiet that followed, Paula's eyes drifted to the ceiling toward the creak of footsteps, the distant clink of a wine glass being placed in a sink upstairs. She closed her eyes. She dreamed that night of keys. Not one, not two, but a ring full of them, jangling with purpose. She walked through a hallway, pressing them into locks that all opened for her, not as a tenant, as an owner. She woke before dawn. The sky outside was a bruised violet. Paula turned on her lamp, logged into her computer, and for the first time in her life, opened a real estate portal. Filters, zip codes, multi-unit buildings. One caught her eye immediately. Familiar address, same street, same lot line, same square footage. Upstairs, she clicked through the details, heart beating steady and strong. Then she typed one more message to Ruth. "I think there's a building for sale right upstairs." She sends Ruth a message. "I think there's a building for sale right upstairs." The building I rented looked back at me like a challenge. The building didn't look all that different in daylight, just a two-flat brownstone, with tired shutters and a cracked walkway. Paula had slipped on more times than she could count. But now, standing on the sidewalk with the sun hitting the faded trim and the for sale sign hanging like a dare, it felt entirely unfamiliar. as if it had been watching her all along, waiting. The front door creaked when she knocked. A woman in her late 40s, blonde highlights and clipboard in hand, opened it with a realtor's smile. "Hi there. You must be Paula. Ruth said you might stop by." "I live here," Paula said, soft but firm. "Downstairs." "Oh." The woman blinked, faltered, then recovered. "Well, good to meet you. I'm Diane. Go ahead and take a look. Upstairs unit's staged, so just mind the tape on the hardwood. We didn't want to refinish too aggressively. Owner's heading to Florida, so it's priced to move." Paula stepped into the entryway she'd passed through for a decade, except now, everything inside it hummed with a new kind of potential. The paint still curled along the ceiling's edges. The vent covers rattled when you walked by them. None of that mattered. She walked up the narrow stairs she had cleaned more times than she could count. Each step felt less like surrender and more like Inside the upstairs unit, the staging was tasteful neutral throw pillows, faux lemons in a glass bowl, light jazz humming from a Bluetooth speaker on the windowsill. But it wasn't the decor Paula noticed. It was the quiet. No Megan heel, no Aaron moving furniture with that apologetic clatter, just the building breathing, like it was waiting to see what she'd do next. She ran a hand along the edge of the counter. Worn, sure, but solid. The listing had called it a mid-century gem. That was generous. But what caught her eye was the line buried mid-paragraph. Seller motivated, owner retiring out of state, open to below-ask offers for immediate close. She whispered it aloud. Motivated. The price was possible. Unlikely, but possible. Especially with her pension, the CD she hadn't touched since her husband passed, and the stock Ruth had once jokingly called her quiet fortune. She pulled out her phone, thumb trembling slightly, and dialed. Ruth answered in one ring. "Talk to me." "I just walked through it," Paula said. "It smells like lemon cleaner and ambition, and the owner wants out, to Florida." A pause, then Ruth's voice crisp and certain. "Yes, you can do this. You are more liquid than you think, and you have leverage, tenants in place, zero learning curve. Most investors won't see the bones like you will." Paula laughed softly. "Imagine their faces. That's half the fun," Ruth replied. Paula was halfway down the steps, heart steady now, when the storm door clattered. Megan, her white coat, too bright for autumn, sunglasses pushed into her curls like a crown. She stopped short, blinking. "Paula, what are you doing here?" "Just stretching my legs," Paula said, too quickly. Megan looked past her, into the open stairwell. Are you looking at the listing?" "I live here," Paula said mildly, "just curious." Megan's mouth twitched, part laugh, part sneer. "Curious, or nosy?" Paula smiled, teeth barely visible, heart pounding beneath her cardigan. But Megan stared a second too long before walking off, heels clicking, voice trailing as she spoke into her phone. "No, you won't believe what I just saw." Back in her apartment, Paula closed the blinds with careful fingers. She sat at her desk, took a breath, and opened the real estate portal again. The screen blinked softly in the dim light. She clicked submit an offer. She filled in her bid under asking, but respectful, serious. She hesitated. Then she clicked submit. Paula submits her offer online. First bid. He asked why I could afford a bid. She asked why I dared. The open house buzzed with low murmurs and the polished cadence of real estate agents, switching between charm and ambition. Paula stood near the kitchen island, still smelling faintly of lemon oil, her bid quietly submitted but not yet acknowledged. She kept her coat on. Though she wasn't cold, there was something about standing in a room you'd only ever rented that made you want to be ready to leave, just in case. A man in his 60s approached her, salt and pepper hair, plaid scarf tucked neatly into his overcoat. The kind of handshake that came with 3 decades of contracts. "I'm Richard," he said, extending a hand. "I own the building, well, for now." Paula shook his hand. "I'm Paula. I live downstairs." His eyebrows lifted. So you're the one with the early offer." Paula nodded. No apology. He glanced around the room, then leaned in just slightly. "Can I ask something off the record?" She nodded again. "You're not a developer, no LLC, no portfolio history, no brokers. Why do you want to buy this place?" She paused only a beat. "To protect my home," she said. and to stop waiting for someone else to decide if I get to stay in it. Richard studied. Something shifted in his posture. Not skepticism, exactly, but awareness. He gave a single nod, and moved on, greeting a couple near the fireplace, with a practiced smile. Minutes later, Paula's phone buzzed. It was Megan. Megan, just heard from Aaron. You're still going with that fantasy bid. Stop. Please. Another ping. Megan, this is reckless. What if the bank laughs you out of the room? Paula locked the screen. No reply. She slipped the phone into her purse like it was a dull knife. Across the room, Diane, the realtor, raised a hand and mouthed paperwork. Paula crossed the living room slowly. Every part of her wanted to tremble, but she didn't. She'd walked these floors barefoot, scrubbed those baseboards, dried tears from her grandson's cheeks on this very road. That made her something more than a bidder. That made her part of the architecture. They sat at a collapsible table. Diane handed her a pen, and slid over the preliminary bid acceptance documents, marked pending approval. Paula signed each one calm and deliberate, like she was writing a recipe from memory. Afterward, she stepped outside to call Ruth. The seller made eye contact. She said quietly, like that alone was proof enough. Then move. Now. Ruth replied. We'll call the bank before lunch. I'll loop in my mortgage contact. You've got the liquid asset base. I'll package it with a note of intent. Does it feel real? Paula asked. Ruth laughed. It's about to feel terrifying. So yeah. After hanging up, Paula stared at her phone for a long moment, then found herself scrolling to a name she hadn't called in a while. Caleb, her grandson, 24, living in Baltimore now. Kind eyes, laughed like her late husband. He answered on the third ring. Grandma, I'm buying the house, she said. Silence, then a breathless laugh. Wait, your house? The whole building. Another pause. Are you serious? As heartburn, she replied, grinning. He laughed again, louder this time. That's the most baller thing I've ever heard. You make it sound like I robbed a bank. You might as well have. His voice steadied. I'm proud of you. She closed her eyes. Then keep that in your pocket, just in case things go sideways. Deal. She hung up, warmth blooming beneath her sternum. That night, she cooked chicken with rosemary and lemon, the scent rising like hope through old vents. She didn't check the portal again. Once was enough. She read until midnight, the contract neatly stacked on her dining table. At 6:42 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Hi, Paula, this is Diane. You're the highest bidder. Seller wants to close fast. He asked if you'd be available to finalize within the week. Paula's heart thudded once, then twice. I'm ready, she said. Realtor calls. You're the highest bidder. Seller wants to close fast. I held keys in my hand the day she said I'd never own a thing. The bank lobby smelled like cedar and toner. Paula sat beneath a glossy print of a sailboat, slicing through blue-gray water. Someone's idea of calm. Her hands rested on her purse, folded so tight the knuckles blanched, but she didn't fidget, not once. Across from her, Ruth tapped gently on her tablet. Sleek and sure. Everything's pre-cleared, she said under her breath. Sign. Initial date. Don't let the length spook you. Paula nodded. A suited woman with kind eyes appeared in the doorway, and called her name. The room where they closed wasn't large, but the document stack was neatly arranged and intimidating. There were pens on either side of the folder, as if the room had been split into before and after. Ready when you are, the notary said, gesturing gently. Paula's fingers brushed the first page. Her signature came slowly at first, like she was convincing herself it would take. Then again. Initial date, sign. By the 5th page, her hand steadied. By the 10th, she looked up and exhaled. Ruth gave her a small nod. You're doing it. Paula smiled. A real one this time. Not polite. And then finally it came. A slim keyring in a manila envelope. Not ceremonial. Not flashy. Just 2 keys in a folded note. Diane, the realtor, leaned forward. Her voice a low hush. Congratulations, Paula. You now own a 175 Red Oak Terrace. All 3 units. Paula blinked. 3? Diane nodded. There's the garden apartment, your current space, and the top floor 2-bedroom where your son and daughter-in-law live. Rent records are in the blue folder. The upper unit's listed under a long-term family lease, well below market by the way. Some legacy arrangement, Something in Paula's chest shifted. She smiled faintly, nodded again, and rose. Outside, the sun was already sliding west, golden, intentional. She walked to her car with her keys in one hand, the other clutching the blue folder. Halfway home, she slowed as she passed the building. Megan's white SUV was parked at its usual tilt in the driveway. The sight didn't spark rage. It sparked clarity. Not 5 minutes later, Aaron pulled up in his truck, rolled down the window. "Need a lift, homeowner?" he asked, eyes bright. She climbed in. He didn't say anything for a moment, just drove, but when they hit the second light, he reached over and squeezed her shoulder. No words, just steady warmth. She pressed her lips together, heart aching from how little it took to feel seen. Back at her apartment, she poured herself a glass of iced tea and called Ruth. "I'm finally a landlord," she said. "You've always been a foundation," Ruth replied. Now the paperwork just caught up. They hung up. She sat down at her desk, the blue folder open beside her, and scrolled through the rent summaries. The top unit, Megan and Aaron's, was nearly 30% under market. The lease had been grandfathered in by the previous owner as a family courtesy. She leaned back. Megan's words returned. "Guess you'll never own this place," like a line from a low-budget villain, like someone who'd never thought the ground beneath her could shift. Paula reached for her phone. No emoji, no flourish. "Paula, look who owns the place." She hit send. No read receipt, just silence for now. She closed the message, and opened a blank document. The header read, "Notice of lease adjustment." Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then she began typing the first sentence. "Dear tenant, as the new property owner, Paula plans rent letters and drafts the first one." My words weren't revenge. They were restitution. The letterhead was simple. Her name, the building address, and a date stamped neatly in the corner. Paula had never needed stationery in her life. She printed these letters on clean printer paper. No gold foil, no flourish, just truth. Each one began the same way. "Dear tenant, as the new owner of 175 Red Oak Terrace, I am writing to inform you of updated lease terms, reflective of current market rates for the area." But then, after the legal wording came her addition typed beneath the paragraph block, like a footnote, but heavier than anything else on the page. "Ownership comes with responsibility. This building has been held together by care, long before property title. Going forward, respect will live on paper, not just in sentiment." 3 copies, one for her own file, one for the garden-level tenant she barely saw but always waved to, and one for the top-floor unit, Aaron and Megan's. That one she folded more slowly. The certified mail envelopes were already waiting by the door. She took her time walking to the post office. The air had cooled, fall fully settled now, and leaves scraped along the sidewalk like whispered agreement. The clerk didn't raise an eyebrow, just scanned the barcodes and handed her receipts. By the next day she had confirmation of delivery. That evening, Paula ate alone. She didn't mind the silence. She'd always believed kitchens could tell when you needed company and when you didn't. Tonight, the room stayed respectfully quiet. Then the text came. "Aaron, letter arrived. Can we talk?" She didn't reply right away. At exactly 6:37 p.m., Megan knocked on the upstairs radiator 3 times, their code when Paula used to babysit Caleb as a toddler. The kind of thing families forgot they ever created. She didn't knock on Paula's door. Instead, she waited until dinner. The meal was tense. Aaron had made chicken parm. Megan didn't eat. She pushed salad leaves in slow circles across her plate before finally slamming her fork down with a clink. "We're family," she snapped. "We don't rent from each other." Paula looked up calmly. "You've rented from someone for years. That someone just changed. But we're not strangers," Megan said, incredulous. "You can't expect us to just accept this like it's a business deal." Aaron stayed quiet, eyes down. Paula's tone didn't rise. "Family care is different from financial disrespect. I have spent a decade paying rent, cooking dinners, watching over this house like it was mine while listening to you remind me it wasn't." Megan's jaw clenched. "I bought the building, I'm maintaining it. I'm not asking for favors, I'm setting terms." Megan stood, grabbing her purse. "This is ridiculous." Paula stood too, steady. "No, this is overdue." She left without dessert. Later that night, Ruth sent over a spreadsheet via email. Projected income, repair reserves, insurance and tax estimates. Paula studied it line by line. You'll be net positive by spring. Ruth had written in the body of the message. This isn't just viable, it's sustainable. And it's yours. She printed the spreadsheet, folded it next to her copy of the lease letters, and placed both in a file folder labeled Ownership 175, ROT. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. The edge had dulled. What remained was structure. At 10:22 p.m., someone pounded on her apartment door. Not a knock, a thud. She opened it slowly. Megan stood in the hallway, hair pinned back, eyes glassy, not with tears but fury. You can't charge us rent, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a dare. Megan storms into Paula's apartment. You can't charge us rent. She threw my letter at me and I smiled at her fury. Megan stormed in, paper in hand, face flushed and furious. Without looking, she let the letter drop heavily onto the table. Its landing sounded like a verdict. You really expect us to pay this rent, she demanded. Tone sharp and accusing. Paula gently reached and lifted the letter, smoothing its creases as though untangling accusation. She folded it carefully, then folded again as if steadying energy in her palms. Yes, she said softly. Market rate. The air settled momentarily. Aaron stood just inside the doorway, silent, as if trying not to inhale blame. Megan's voice rose. We're family. We don't rent from each other. Paula nodded slowly. Which is what I thought too. But now I own the building. Megan's jaw clenched. You've lived here rent cheap for years. You think selling it to yourself changes everything. Paula's reply was steady, measured. I paid. I cared. I raised a son. I trusted you. That won't change. Aaron shifted, discomfort crossing his face. Can we discuss this calmly? Megan flinched. There's nothing calm about betrayal. Paula inhaled quietly. Then let's call it fairness. I paid rent, Megan scoffed. Not handouts. I paid too, Paula replied. Then I bought with equity I earned. Now I protect it. A tense silence filled the apartment like an unwritten rule. Words that could fill hours felt heavier in echoes. Paula gestured to the wall calendar. The lease notice, the certified mail receipts, the stamped envelopes resting in the open blue folder. There are rules. I followed them. She added, I sent you both the draft lease. Ruth consulted a local real estate attorney. Every legal box checked. Megan clenched her arms around her body. So we sign, or we call our lawyers. Paula didn't shrink. You're welcome to, but understand, this is no longer your mother-in-law speaking softly. This is your landlord speaking honestly. Aaron swallowed hard. Mom, I'm in the middle. Paula looked toward him, gentle but firm. Stay present, honey. Don't silence your own voice. Megan glared, then spun and marched toward the door. Aaron diverted her path. Mom, he said, voice raw with conflict. I'm not here to hurt her, Paula said, turning. I'm here to protect what's mine. She tucked the folder under her arm like a shield. Megan collapsed against the doorframe. We're done, she said flatly. I won't sign. Paula's expression softened. Not regret. Resolute clarity. Then you choose refusal. Megan turned without another word, her keys jangling as she stormed off. Aaron watched her go, then paused. He exhaled slowly. His eyes on Paula filled with guilt and gratitude, loneliness and love. Back inside, Paula sat gently at the table. She opened her laptop and typed a simple message to Ruth. Sent both lease drafts. Status no signature. Megan escalating. No changes. Within moments, Ruth replied. Legal review finalized. Lease stands. If she refuses, that's her choice, not yours. Paula closed the message, her breath steady now. She opened the blue folder and arranged every document with care. Lease drafts. Mail receipts. Attorney review. Family email copy. Late evening shadows draped her kitchen. She brewed chamomile tea, the steam curling like a whispered affirmation. This was hers. At 8:16 p.m. her phone rang, the screen showing unknown number. With calm heart she answered. Ms. Worthing? The voice was crisp, professional. Yes, this is attorney Melissa Hernandez. I represent Megan Worthing. She has filed a complaint with the tenancy board, alleging emotional coercion and familial pressure regarding the lease terms. Paula listened. The words landed soft but heavy. She's challenging legal ownership based on family relationship, the attorney continued. A breath wound through her lungs. She exhaled, steady. I understand, Paula said. I'll cooperate. She paused, letting silence breathe in the space. When can we expect? The voice hesitated. Paula replied quietly. I'm not worried. The paperwork is in order. They spoke more formalities, etiquette, case numbers. She ended the call and rested her phone on the counter gently, like placing something final onto a table. The kitchen was quiet again, except for the humming refrigerator. The hum felt steady, expectant. Paula poured the tea and carried it to her desk, trailing fingers along the envelope filled with lease drafts. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt anticipated. Responsibility had its own weight, and tonight it rested with her. The lawyer calls. Megan filed a complaint against you. The letter curled slightly at the edges, still warm from the mailbox. Paula held it in one hand, her other already reaching for the manila folders stacked on her kitchen table. She hadn't even broken the seal, but she knew. Megan had followed through. She opened it slowly, pressing her thumb along the envelope's edge, like it was a fault line. The words inside were as expected, icy with politeness, clipped with legal formality. Megan had filed a complaint with the housing board. Allegations of coercion, emotional manipulation, exploitation of family. Paula didn't flinch. She slid the letter into a plastic sleeve, then reached for her phone. Start from the top, Ruth said when she answered. So Paula did. Her voice was calm, almost clinical, as she read the complaint aloud. She's trying to turn motherhood into misconduct, Paula murmured. Then we meet fiction with documentation, Ruth replied. It's time to gather the walls you built. By afternoon, Paula's kitchen table was cleared. Fruit bowl moved. Tea mug pushed aside. Manila folders laid out like a quiet army. Bank statements. Lease drafts. Certified mail receipts. A copy of the purchase contract. Everything was sorted by color-coded tabs. Next came the call to Dennis, the real estate attorney who had handled her closing. You're the legal owner, he confirmed. Every form, every tax ID, every utility notice is in your name. If her challenge is based on your being her mother-in-law, the board won't touch it. It's not illegal to lease to family. Paula nodded, though no one could see. She's calling it a power imbalance, she said. Dennis replied. The only imbalance is that you have the title and she doesn't. That night Paula made soup, beef barley heavy with root vegetable, the kind her late husband used to ask for when winters arrived early. She let it simmer while she printed emails, highlighted paragraphs, circled timelines. Everything felt heavier now but not oppressive, more like armor. Aaron stopped by just after. He stood just inside her doorway, hands in the pockets of his hoodie. She said, You're preparing documents. I am. His voice dropped. Can this break us? She looked up. It could, she said honestly, but pretending nothing's wrong would break us faster. Aaron nodded slowly, torn. She's scared. So was I when the rent hike came, Paula said gently. This isn't punishment. This is ownership. He swallowed hard, then gave her a long look. You're not backing down. No, she said. They didn't, but they stayed in the same room a little longer than necessary. And that was something. Later, Ruth emailed over a checklist. Housing ordinances, lease verification protocols, evidence presentation timelines. Do not improvise, Ruth warned. Let truth and paper do the talking. At 9:42 p.m., Paula received a notification. Subject, hearing scheduled, housing complaint number 57T. She opened it with steady hands. The local housing board had scheduled the hearing, 10 days from now, face to face. Paula reached for a fresh folder, labeled it in bold letters, and slipped the notice inside. The hum of her printer continued in the background, the warm light of her desk lamp, spilling over her careful handwriting. She didn't feel afraid. She felt the local housing board schedules a hearing. Every camera, every door code became mine. The new lock blinked green as Paula keyed in the code she'd chosen. Her late mother's birth year followed by her own. Subtle, private. The keypad gave a soft click, the kind of sound that didn't echo through drywall, but lived deep in her bones. Ownership sounded like that now, secure. By noon, every entry code across the property had changed. Paula posted notices at each mailbox, crisp and double-taped. As of Monday, entry codes will be updated per revised tenant agreement. Please respond with your acknowledgement by end of business Friday. She kept a file of tenant copies, a clipboard of signatures waiting for return slips, like receipts of respect. When the garden-level tenant dropped his form back in her mailbox by 5 p.m., she gave a quiet nod. The system was working. Then came the buzz on her phone. Megan, this is so demeaning. We're not strangers, why treat us like tenants? Paula read the message once, let the heat rise and fall, and typed her reply with deliberate slowness. Paula's structure replaces chaos. It's not punishment, it's clarity. Ruth called that evening. I've cataloged all your updates. Camera logs, lock change invoices, printed notices. You're over-prepared. Just how I like it. In the background, Paula heard her printer running. 2 more copies of everything she'd mailed. Redundant? Maybe. But trust had never lived in assumption. Aaron came down the stairs quietly that night with a folded duffel bag. I'm staying in the guest room upstairs for now, he said. Just feels cleaner. Paula nodded, not as permission but as acknowledgement. They both understood the value of neutral ground. 2 days passed. Megan still hadn't returned her signed form. Instead, she started maneuvering. First came the noise complaint, filed anonymously, but obvious. Then a message from the neighbor across the way. I heard you changed access to the side drive. Megan said she can't use it now. Paula stood outside the gate that afternoon, walking the property with her phone recording. Everything was accessible. Driveway, clear. Pathway, unobstructed. Security lighting and signage intact. She sent the footage to Ruth immediately. I'll timestamp it, Ruth said. If she tries to say you barricaded anything, this crushes it. That night, Megan rang the porch bell hard. 3 sharp presses, like demands. Paula answered through the intercom. Use the front entrance. That's the code now. You're locking me out of my own life, Megan. No, Paula said softly. I'm asking you to step into the part where I'm no longer invisible. The line went dead. At 7:12 the next morning, a courier knocked. Not postal, not casual. A private delivery service, dressed in navy and urgency. Paula signed and opened the envelope on her front steps. It was from the housing board. Formal seal, red ink, official tone. Notice of neighbor complaint. Allegation access obstruction. Dispute filed against landlord, Paula Worthing, under Civil Access Clause section. She folded the letter slowly, breathed through her nose, and tucked it into her dispute binder, right behind Megan's text messages. Paula receives a formal notice. Neighbor dispute filed, claiming I blocked access. They escalated, so I shared everything. Paula stood at her desk beneath the soft glow of the lamp, the new housing board notice trembling slightly in her fingers. She unpacked her evidence folder, laying everything out like chapters of truth. The neighbor complaint, Megan's but also receipts. Insurance paid, plumbing repaired before tenants complained, roof fixed last spring, garden cleared last fall, even the HOA dues paid early when the late landlord shirked responsibility. For each dollar she produced, she'd logged an entry date, amount, purpose. She didn't speak, just sorted. Maintenance ledger, closing documents, certified notice of lock changes. Into the binder it all went, meticulously labeled, improvements, insurance, taxes, tenant communication. Every page felt heavy but necessary. That morning she knocked on the door of her downstairs tenant, Mrs. Delgado, who'd been one of the few neighbors to wave hello on moving day. She emerged with a scarf and a curious smile. I heard what's happening, Mrs. Delgado said. You did so much for this place long before paperwork named you landlord. Paula invited her inside, showing her the ledger briefly. Mrs. Delgado nodded, leaning on the counter. I kept track too when you planted the spring bulbs. When Aaron fixed the gutter, it all showed care. I'll write a note if it helps. That afternoon, a few other neighbors approached, as she retrieved her mail. A veteran tenant, who'd lived across the driveway for 20 years, another who rented the garden unit. They each quietly offered willingness to testify to her fairness, her presence, her upkeep. Paula collected their names, dates, and short quotes. Back home, Daniel drafted a miniature newsletter, 4 pages, ownership transparency, support testimonials, upcoming housing board hearing. It was soft cream cardstock with rounded corners so it looked thoughtful, not adversarial. He folded it and set it beside the ledger. Paula didn't open it until evening. Then, with a soft breath, she typed an email to her housing lawyer and Ruth. Subject: evidence package and witness list. Attaching the ledger, the testimonials, the newsletter, and all prior correspondence. She specified the payment of lanes the prior owner left unpaid. That detail felt like leverage. Clean title, no hidden debt, her financial integrity intact. Lawyer actualized the reply minutes later. Your ownership chain is flawless. That extra payment erases risk. Adds clarity. They won't find error in your ownership record. That night, Paula and Lorraine sat together in the living room, reviewing the binder. Paula rehearsed her words softly. I took possession fully on Sep 20. I rekeyed, notified, rehired the entry code. I spent $3,100 on gutter repair. $6,008. I bought insurance coverage, effective. Nav 1 for 15. I treated ownership like stewardship, because it matters. Lorraine quietly played devil's advocate. What if they question why you didn't discuss rent changes verbally? Paula nodded, and retrieved her tenant notification log. Emails sent, acknowledged, reminders stamped with certified mail dates. All filed. Daniel sat quietly with his newsletter in hand, nodding at each point, as if counting beats. Finally, they scheduled the hearing. The document arrived. Hearing date: March 15, 90 Beef Housing Board, 12 Elm Street. Paula folded the calendar page carefully. The date glowed like a pinprick in her mind. The binder lay open on the table. Notebooks ready. Pens on margin note. She looked at Lorraine across from her and said, steady. I'm ready. Hearing scheduled, and Paula rehearses calmly with Lorraine. They expected tears or regret. I expected clarity. Paula paused at the threshold of hearing room. The air inside smelled faintly of polished wood and institutional calm. She carried her slim testimony binder like a briefcase, understated, deliberate. Inside, every envelope, invoice and tenant quote, lay arranged in exact order. She wore a plain gray blouse. No jewelry save a simple watch. Clear. Paused. Megan and her lawyer entered shortly after. Megan's shoulders taut, her eyes haunted with uncertainty. Her lawyer, mid-40s in a navy suit that strained at the elbow seams, offered an apology that felt rehearsed. Paula nodded to the clerk and found her seat at the front table. The board members filed in, 3 women in their 60s and 1 man, whose desk nameplate read, Chair Delaney. They settled behind the dais. Silent authority. The clerk introduced the case, and asked Paula to begin. She stood, cleared her throat softly, and opened her binder to the first tab. Slide after slide, property deeds, HOA lane payoff confirmation, receipts for maintenance, certified mail logs. The board watched quietly as Paula read. I assumed all obligations when I purchased on September 20, etc. Her voice stayed even. No tremor, no regret, just steady facts. Next, Mrs. Delgado and the tenant from across the driveway raised hands. Each spoke briefly. Paula mows the garden. She fixed my pipes before rent was due. She's considerate even when it mattered. The board scribbled notes. A couple of other neighbors echoed similar sentiment. When Megan's counsel rose to examine, his questions felt soft and unfocused. Did you ever ask for rent in writing before her ownership? The tenant shook head. Did Paula ever deny your access rights after the change? Again, no. Paula's ledger covered each possible angle. When asked about the rent hike process, she showed her notification slips, copy receipts, even dated emails announcing entry code updates. Megan's counselor cleared his throat, scribbling but without contradiction. Aaron appeared in the audience row behind Paula, quiet but steady. At one point their eyes met, and he nodded. A reassurance, private but enough. Megan was invited to speak. She stood, voice shaky. I felt displaced. I thought this was my home. Her lawyer murmured beneath his breath. Megan's statements lacked specificity. No records. No charts. Only despair. A few board members exchanged glances. Chair Delaney leaned forward. Ms. Worthing, she said to Paula, is there anything else you'd like to add? Paula closed her binder. She stood taller, meeting all eyes. Firm but not angry. Yes, ownership doesn't erase kindness. It formalizes it. I did not ask for rhetoric. I offered structure. If any tenant here can show otherwise, I welcome it. But until then, I trust this board will see documentation over assumption. She sat. Delaney nodded, flipping through the binder. Thank you. That concludes oral testimony. The boardroom fell still. No one spoke. Only the hum of the overhead heating system filled the silence. Then Delaney spoke again, voice soft but measured. The board is impressed by the thorough documentation and clarity of process. We will deliberate and issue a ruling in 72 hours. A clerk passed by with folded documents. Megan rose, shoulders shaking slightly. Paula watched her, expression steady, not triumphant, just certain. Aaron slipped quietly out of the room afterward. He offered Paula his arm as they descended the steps. On the porch, she inhaled night air and felt something settle. Nothing loud, but a foundation of certainty under her spine. They didn't speak until they reached her door. Then Aaron squeezed her hand. Whatever comes, he said. You were exact, she nodded. A soft, quiet acknowledgement that spoke more than words. Inside, she closed the door, placed her binder back on the kitchen table under the lamp's glow, and touched the printed covers as if greeting old friends. No relief yet, just anticipation. The board chair says ruling will be issued in 72 hours. I didn't laugh as they paid. I watched them pay attention. Paula reviewed the morning sunlight through the apartment window as her email notification pinged. The first rent invoice, sent just days ago, now landed in her inbox with a confirmation stamp, paid in full. She didn't smile. Her satisfaction was steadier than that. She clicked open the invoice. The amount was correct, timing as per new lease, gentle acknowledgement in the memo field. Paid by Megan. It felt significant. Downstairs, her bank app showed credits flowing in. Megan's rent first, then Michael from the garden unit, with two vowels shy but prompt as ever. And Mrs. Delgado, whose payment included a small note, thank you for finally securing the building. Paula read each message, absorbing them quietly. That afternoon, she walked to the bank and deposited the funds into her new reserve account. The teller commented, nice to see good balance. Paula nodded, not needing to clarify which kind, financial or moral. Back home, she logged into her spreadsheet. The ledger updated, $1,250 rent from the top unit, $1,000 from the middle, garden units $850. All aligned with her bank statement. One by one, tenants who'd once worried about lost security deposited their dues. Now compliance or clarity was paying. Ruth called just as Paula closed the laptop. You've collected on schedule, she said, and the reserve account setup is smart. Have you thought about what to do with? While Paula reviewed Ruth's investment options, high-yield savings, community housing grants, or emergency repair funds, her grandson Caleb called. He was 24, studying finance in Baltimore. He asked what had changed. Paula explained, ownership isn't just paper, it's responsibility. She taught him how each dollar she deposited represented not just rent collected, but home's upkeep, tenants' trust, contingency resilience. He listened, said so it's not profit, it's protection. His tone held pride and softness she used to hear from Aaron. After the call, she uploaded a small PDF of her ledger and paid in slips to the reserve account portal. Balanced. Not for applause, just practice. That evening, she turned on the porch lights. The garden glowed amber. She shelled peas for dinner and lined up the invoices for filing. Megan's transmission printed, Aaron's acknowledgement, Mrs. Delgado's snail-mailed receipt. Everything had its place. Logically, tenderly. At 9:03 p.m. her phone buzzed. Megan, I'm moving out for good. No emoji, just 4 words. Paula closed her eyes, steady. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. Just let the silence settle like a slow release. Then she tapped a reply. Paula, I'm sorry you feel that way. Please let me know your move-out date so we can arrange inspection and refund. She didn't hit send immediately. Waited. Then pressed. With the same deliberation as every rent invoice, every lease signature, every code reset. Clarity wasn't chaos, it was precision. The pane of her kitchen window reflected golden garden lights and ledger folders stacked neatly. A fragile peace. A quiet stewardship. Responsibilities weren't hers just to own, but to hold. Megan sends a message. I'm moving out for good. She left her keys behind, and I found my peace. Morning light fell across the living room rug as Paula held the envelope. Megan left slipped under her door. Inside, a single brass key. No note, no explanation. Just absence. She didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She simply placed the key beside her ledger and folded her hands. Within the hour, Paula changed the lock yet again. New fob codes. All entries updated. She posted notices that compliance would be required for access, adding in parentheses what felt like a quiet affirmation. For safety and clarity. The handoff felt momentous. Permission transformed into policy. Ownership meant that afternoon, Aaron came by. He didn't knock. He opened the side gate and paused at the porch stairs. I'm staying here for now, he said quietly. Duffel bag in hand. He'd removed photos from Megan's unit a few days before, and clothes were already in the washer. The weight of transition pressed in equal parts grief and relief. Paula nodded slowly, retrieving a mug of tea. Space becomes honest when we say it is. She gestured at the door. Make it your place tonight. He exhaled. Sad but steady. Okay. At dinner, Paula sat alone at the kitchen table. A knock at the screen door startled her. Mrs. Delgado appeared, raincoat on even though the skies were clear. How are you holding up? Mrs. Delgado asked, holding a small loaf of sourdough. Paula pressed the bread into her hand. Truthfully, stronger than I imagined. She returned the gesture, a gentle gratitude. Outside, other neighbors nodded from porches as she sorted for rent flyers and business cards onto a small signboard by her mailbox. She stepped back and looked lean sign, crisp font, intentional simplicity. She was not desperate. She was deliberate. Later, Lorraine arrived carrying flowers and warmth. You've rebuilt in more than ledgers, Lorraine said, taking a seat at the porch swing. You owned the building and now you own your peace. Paula inhaled the flower scent, closing her eyes. Ownership isn't just land, she said. It's knowing what you protect and when it frees you. Lorraine never said more. She reached across and squeezed Paula's hand. Steady protector, meeting steady resolve. Night fell. Paula walked the perimeter checking locks, sensor lights, intercom. All worked. No keys remained her past. The property hummed readiness, not fear. Back inside, she placed a final copy of the lease ledger and tenant testimonials in the drawer labeled archived. She didn't feel applause. She felt precision. Just before bed, her phone buzzed. New tenant, unknown number. Is the rooftop pet-friendly? Paula sat up. Pet-friendly. A hopeful sign. Not from her past. From her vision now. She smiled quietly and typed Paula, yes, £30 maximum. Well-trained only. Welcome to the building. She sent it, then laid the phone face down. The gentle glow from the porch lantern pooled beneath her framed ledger on the mantel. For the first time since the rent increase notice, everything felt settled. She owned the building, and now she owned her. A potential new renter calls asking, is the rooftop pet-friendly? It wasn't just tenants. Investors began admiring her ownership. That morning, a knock came from the vacant upstairs unit. Paula opened the door to find a sharply dressed man in his 40s, clipboard in hand, polite but confident. I'm Alex Chen, small-scale landlord. I noticed your for rent sign, thought I'd ask before listing formally. Paula stepped aside. Come. He toured the space, original hardwood floors, high ceilings, just starting to show watermarks. Paula pointed to a slight dip in the ceiling near the front hall. I measured it, she said. Needs retiling and gutter reinforcement. I'm estimating $8,000. Alex nodded thoughtfully. What rent are you seeking? Paula named the figure. Mid-market fare. Repairs, she explained factually, would require a reserve buffer, but she intended to rebuild the foundation responsibly. He paused. I admire this. Most owners push tenants aside. You built trust first. She allowed herself a quiet smile. That afternoon, Ruth visited unexpectedly, with materials for a small property union she'd helped create locally. Community-minded landlords supporting each other, Ruth said. I think you'd be a natural mentor. Paula reviewed the pamphlets, safety norms, group repair bids, shared insurance discounts. She pinned one discreetly to her corkboard. Upgrading, not hosting. Daniel dropped by next. He carried a measuring tape and note. We're upgrading hallway lights to motion sensor LEDs and adding grab rails by the stairs, he said, sketching on the notepad. Might improve safety and reduce liability. Paula watched him measure thoughtfully. And that roof issue? We'll allocate from escrow once we have tenants' deposit, he replied. We'll collect a standard premium this cycle. She nodded, turning home. These weren't fixes, they were investments in continuity. That evening, Alex returned to sign the lease. He arrived with a check for first month and security deposit, neatly folded into an envelope. I want to rent, he said simply. Paula handed him a signed receipt, the numbers aligned. The ledger updated. She had just collected a formal, carefully negotiated rent from someone invested, not just in space, but in structure. As he left, she moved toward the front window and watched him walk down the driveway. No triumph in her look, just composed pride. Later, she logged into her bank to establish a roof repair escrow account. She transferred the reserved funds earmarked, tenant deposits, plus a portion of maintenance buffer. It appeared on her screen as Roof Fund $8,200. Enough, responsible. Read. She closed her laptop and sat by the window, listening to the soft hum of streetlights. Morning came with unexpected clarity. Her phone buzzed. Local journalist, you're the landlord who evicted her daughter-in-law. Want to share your story? Paula stared at the message. It carried the risk of exposure, and perhaps the opportunity to shape narrative. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing the steadiness she had practiced for weeks. Then she tapped a reply. Paula, I'd rather show how ownership holds accountability. Let me know your anger. She set the phone down. The ledger rested beside the roof fund balance sheet, the guest check draft, and Daniel's sketch of safety upgrades. Responsibility had given her more than shelter. It had given her space, real structure and possibility. She looked out the window. The building stood quiet and still, held together by careful stewardship. She smiled quietly, a mix of relief and resolve. Local journalist calls. You're the landlord who evicted her daughter-in-law. Want to share your story? My revenge wasn't loud. It was legal and public. The cafe was quiet, tucked between a florist and a used bookshop, its booths wide enough for conversation to feel private without needing to whisper. Paula arrived early, her folder in one hand and calm in the other. She chose a seat near the window, light catching the rim of her coffee mug just as the journalist entered. Ella Foy, early 30s, notepad already out, with the sharpness of someone who listened for a living. She shook Paula's hand, warm and curious, and opened with a disclaimer. I'm not here to frame you, just to hear. Paula nodded. Then I'll offer facts, not blame. They spoke for over an hour. Paula didn't embellish. She recounted the rent hikes, the closing papers, the ledgers, the hearing, and Megan's departure. No venom, just verification. She emphasized her responsibility, the garden repairs, tenant transparency, how structure replaced sentiment where sentiment had turned hostile. Ella scribbled notes, her brow furrowed at first, then softened. You didn't retaliate, she finally said. I clarified, Paula replied. The law holds weight when kindness stops working. By the time they finished, the coffee had gone cold. Ella asked to take a photo, nothing posed, just Paula standing near her porch, hands folded lightly. Daniel arrived just as the photo was taken. He adjusted the lighting with a quiet nod, and didn't flinch when Ella called him her on-the-ground credibility. That evening Paula received a preview of the piece. The headline read, From Renter to Landlord, How One Woman Reclaimed Her Home Without Raising Her Voice. The article walked through her journey, a middle-aged widow, forced into financial vigilance, a woman whose family dismissed her until ownership placed her name on every line that mattered. Megan's complaints were mentioned, but gently, even skeptically. No comment, the article noted beneath Megan's photo. Paula scrolled slowly, then paused. Near the end, Ella had included a quote from Ruth. "Leadership isn't loud, it's legal." And Paula knew the difference. Before bed, Paula read several comments and emails. Women in their 60s and 70s, thanking her, sharing their stories. One wrote, "I didn't know it was okay to ask for respect in writing." Another said, "I wish I'd done what you did before I moved out of my daughter's garage." Daniel returned with the printed edition the next morning. The front page banner tucked the photo into the lower corner, but it was unmistakably her face, composed, garden blooming behind her. "You look like someone who just reclaimed soil," Daniel joked. Paula smiled, eyes glinting. "I feel like someone who just remembered she knew how to plant." Lorraine arrived soon after, carrying a to-go tray of strong coffee and 3 small almond pastries. "I read it twice," she said, then highlighted it, then cried. Paula handed her a napkin. "Tears aren't required." "No," Lorraine replied, "but reverence is." She leaned over the table, squeezing Paula's wrist gently. "You turned ownership into something spiritual. You mentor without speeches." Paula didn't deflect. She took the words in fully. Later that afternoon, Paula received an unexpected voicemail. It was Alex Chen, the new tenant upstairs. "Quick note. I didn't mention it during our lease meeting, but I work with a community development nonprofit. We've been tracking properties like yours, stable, owner-occupied, fair. If you're interested in partnership on renovations, grants, or long-term tenant strategy, I'd love to talk." Paula replayed it once, stunned. Not an investor out for equity, a steward, like her. That evening she sat on the porch swing with her phone in one hand, and the newspaper folded at her side. The article had gone live. She skimmed it one more time, feeling both old and reborn. She opened her messages, tapped out a line to no one in particular, then read it aloud to herself. "You should have said I'd never own anything." Then she smiled, slow, quiet, and steady. The article goes live and Paula smiles at her phone. "You should have said I'd never own anything. I didn't just acquire a building, I reclaimed my worth." The rooftop had never felt so alive. Soft string lights swayed gently above the folding tables, casting warm glows onto glass pitchers filled with lemonade and slices of cucumber. A modest speaker hummed jazz standards while neighbors clustered in quiet circles, holding paper plates piled with pasta salad, grilled zucchini, and tiny chocolate cupcakes from the bakery. Lorraine had sworn by since Paula stood near the railing, a linen blouse fluttering slightly in the early evening breeze. Her hair had grown longer, silver streaks, like soft declarations. 1 year to the day since the hearing. She had invited everyone, tenants, family, even the old building inspector, who once warned her about clogged gutters, not out of nostalgia, out of restoration. Aaron arrived first, hand in hand with Caleb, who now worked full-time at a credit union. Caleb hugged her hard, then helped set up chairs without asking. Lorraine brought the flowers, sunflowers and blue delphiniums, and placed them on every table. Ruth showed up with Daniel, both carrying folding trays and firm smiles. And then, Alex. He came in crisp khakis, shook hands with nearly everyone, and brought with him a printed set of documents: community rent caps, shared maintenance fund outlines, proposals for mixed-use housing. 2 blocks away, he leaned into Paula's ear, voice warm with promise. "We're piloting your structure, affordable, tenant-friendly, paper-strong." She nodded, heart quietly hammering. Near sunset, Daniel stood atop a step stool, and raised a plastic cup, to her and her keys, he said. Not because she locked anyone out, but because she let structure in. A ripple of laughter followed. Even Ruth chuckled, lifting her glass. Aaron clapped once, just once, but it felt like a chapter closing. Ruth stepped forward, handing Paula a wrapped "For the wall above your desk," she said. Inside was her lease, the original copy from the day she closed, now mounted behind glass, etched with a brass plate that simply read, "Paula Worthing, legal owner, 1175, Red Oak Terrace." A date, a declaration. Paula's throat tightened as she touched the glass. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it had once felt impossible. After the gathering began to fade, and neighbors hugged goodnight, she walked the last guests to the stairwell. Lorraine lingered behind. "You know," Lorraine said, brushing crumbs from her dress, "what you've done, Most people would have left after the first insult. Paula glanced toward the building's far edge, the city stretching quietly below. I used to think retreat was grace, she murmured. But sometimes, grace is staying, and growing things right. When the last dish was packed and the music finally stopped, she wandered alone to the rooftop's far side. The string lights flickered faintly above her head. A soft hush wrapped around the terrace, like a final bow. She placed her hands on the railing. Down below, the garden she once tended in silence, now bloomed in layered color. The new solar panels, gleaming like quiet rewards, shimmered atop the second unit. The lights on each porch glowed like punctuation, small but whole. She pulled her keys from her pocket. There were 6 of them now. Front door, roof access, storage closet, mailbox, laundry guest unit, 6 entries, 6 affirmations. She clutched them gently. The city breathed below. Wind moved softly through her blouse, like it had always known how far she'd come. She stepped fully onto the rooftop, head tilted slightly skyward, and whispered, I own more than a space now. Then she smiled, not for the building, but for the woman she'd become inside it. Paula steps onto the rooftop, breathes deeply, and whispers, I own more than a space now.